Good morning, everybody. This is Walk the Dog with Riot Mort, and it is Thursday about 6:30 a.m. and we're at the end of the week. That means tomorrow is the Tactician's Crown, which should be pretty exciting. I'm looking forward to this weekend. Um, the old saying, "Absence makes the heart grow fonder." I definitely, I don't know. There's something about not working on TFT that makes me miss TFT, but thankfully that's going to make my weekends all the more pleasant. Um, Looking forward to casting. I was setting up my setup last night, making sure I'm ready to go. I don't have any fancy graphics, so it's going to be the lowest tech co-stream out there, but we work with what we got, so it'll be fine. One other fun little story this morning. Happened to be browsing Twitter, as I sometimes do, and there was a post that someone had tagged me on, because the initial post said, "Hey, for everyone complaining about Hearthstone's new expansion, it could be worse. We could be TFT, which is on its last legs." And they had linked the stream stats on Twitch because Hearthstone had 12K at the time and TFT had 1K. Now, keep in mind, this was, whatever time of day, near the end of the set, very recent. Everyone's getting ready for the championship. That's fine. And so, their logic is that TFT is dying because the Twitch stats at the end of the set are low. Okay. And then someone had tagged me in it and said, "Yeah, set 14 was pretty bad. Even Mort Dog is jumping ship." And it was just like, man, it continues. It shouldn't surprise me, but it continues to surprise me that people are just so misinformed. And that's all that platform is people who have no idea what they're talking about posting nonsense. Because again, I did not jump ship. I will be going back to TFT. I am excited to go back to TFT. Now, hilariously enough, I actually went to try to reply to this because sometimes I can't help myself. And the original poster had me blocked. So that was another sign of like, oh, never mind. This is just a hater. Okay, cool. That's fine. That's fine. So, yeah. Anyway, for those of you that are watching, TFT is not dying, not remotely. And no, I did not jump ship. I was asked to help with a problem. I'm helping with that problem. And I will be excited to come back. And there's some shit in the future we are doing that's going to be great. So, yeah. Anyway, all right. I'm also excited to answer one of the questions today because I got asked a really good question, and this question might take up the whole time. We'll see how quickly I can get through it. It also came from LeDuc, who I always appreciate. All right. So the question is, currently there's two main audiences of TFT, if you will, the for fun players and the competitive players is the way we're grouping them under this assessment. How would TFT change if we just focused on one or the other instead of the weird middle ground that we're doing right now? Now, this is such an interesting question because there is a world where, hypothetically, my boss's boss comes to me and says, "Hey, we did some audience segmentation and we found out that, catering to competitive players is damaging our for fun players, which is a larger audience." Or there's another world where my boss's boss comes to me and says, "Hey, our lack of competitive things is lowering the aspirational drive of our casual players. So we need to make sure that the competitive players are, in a better spot," right? Like, this is not an outlandish scenario to think about, right? Like, this is something that you should at least, if you were a designer on TFT, I would expect you to be really thinking about. And so that's why I really like this question. Is like, it's not that crazy. And we've definitely got people on the team at the higher up level, not necessarily on design, but at different levels, who might be like, "Hey, I think we're leaning a bit too much on the competitive side. I think we're leaning a bit too much on the for fun side." Both ways. Hilariously enough, it's actually one of the things I've really struggled with because if you asked players, about my design direction, I bet, like, especially on Reddit, right? Like, they would tell you that Mort focuses way too much on for fun players. But internally, there are a lot of people who think I only think about competitive players, and I don't think about for fun players. So internally at Riot, I have a reputation as the competitive designer, but externally, I have the reputation as the for fun designer. And so I'm just sitting there pulling out my hair going, guys, that neither is true. Stop it. And so, because the truth is in the middle. And I think to make the best product, we do have to appeal to others, to both. But to answer the original question, what would change? So let's start with the for fun players, right? Generally, I think, regardless of which audience we're going for, the core gameplay loop of TFT wouldn't change, right? Like, we've said that core gameplay loop of TFT is fun. It is what it is, right? Make 3 stars, make champions, roll for stuff, pick augments. All of that I don't think changes too dramatically, no matter which audience we're going for. But the outputs of those, I think, is where a lot of the focus would change. Now, what I mean by that is, generally I have a rule when I'm helping balance the game, is that the power of something has to be relative to the difficulty to acquire it. That's a pretty simple framework. So for example, a 1-star Shaco, not very powerful because the difficulty to acquire it is you buy it in the first shop. Not that hard, right? Whereas a 1-star Urgot gets to be stronger because you have to wait 25 minutes and hit at least level 7. And then even then, the odds of hitting it are lower, right? And for the most extreme cases, this is your 3-star 4 costs, your 3-star 5 costs, your prismatic traits, right? Like, they get to be quite powerful, but in order to keep them powerful, we have to have them be very, very rare. And so I think one of the biggest things that would change would be how often we let players hit that power fantasy. And the reason for this is that generally, our for fun players, as we call them, one of the things I think we would say is, on average, let's say a for fun player, and these are not real numbers, so again, I'm not disclosing weird information here, but let's say on average, our for fun players play 50 games a set. Let's just use that number. We would want to make sure that the for fun players have some of our spikiest, exciting moments within those 50 games, right? There was a good example recently. Again, I'm only referencing this because it's the most recent thing I saw. Froden was reading our set learnings, and he talked about how his wife, who's like a gold level player, has played like 200 or 300 games across multiple sets and never hit a prismatic trait, right? Like, that's not really the kind of experience. If we're really trying to appeal to that type of player and make sure they have fun, we would probably make those things more common so that they get to experience those highs more often and more frequently. So what you would see is things like spatula drop rates would probably go up. Prismatic orbs would probably appear more often. And hilariously enough, there's already kind of a sign of the extreme version of this, which is Chonk's Treasure, right? Like, let's not pretend Chonk's Treasure isn't just the most extreme for fun mode out there. But that's why a lot of people love it. I bet you Froden's wife could hit a prismatic trait in Chonk's Treasure. So the short answer is that we would end up leaning a little bit more towards that Chonk's Treasure output, where you get to hit a lot of the highs within the TFT space a lot more often. In addition, I think we would be a lot more willing to break the game, if you will. And what I mean by that is, the augment that was, what was it called? I can't remember the name of it, but the one that said all champions buy and sell for 0 gold. And that's an example of an augment that in a competitive game pretty bad. But in a for fun game, screw it. Let them pick it. Having an augment diff in a for fun game is a lot more forgivable. Things like Cruel Pact, right, which is already on the line, I think we'd be more willing to do. As the for fun players are more willing to accept that things aren't quite balanced. So I could imagine those changing pretty frequently. I could imagine artifacts being even sharper. And all of this is because, it's funny, whether or not you believe this or not, but I think Hearthstone Battlegrounds is actually a pretty good example of this, because the reality is, Hearthstone Battlegrounds is a relatively for fun game that, your outcomes are going to be decided by coin flips and things like that. And so, but if you accept that, that's fine, right? And some people will enjoy that. So, yeah, the TLDR of if we targeted the for fun players is I think we end up a little bit more like Strong's Treasure, a little bit more willing to let people hit things more often, and a little bit more willing to break the game with things like augments and artifacts. I think that would be, and I think our balance patches would actually be a lot smaller as well. Because one of the other things is that for fun players generally aren't looking for is to relearn the game every 2 weeks. And so I could imagine our balance patches being a lot smaller, and instead sort of being like hey, okay, it's been 2 weeks and we nerf one champion and one item. It's like, that way it's a little bit more digestible. So I could see that being some of the big cues. Now, on the flip side, if we tried to make our game more competitive, I think, hilariously enough, you go the opposite direction. And it's not to say that competitive players and for fun players want different things. And this is the challenge, right? Is that competitive players in particular are liars. And yeah, I'm going to say that. I'm going to say that with certainty. Competitive players will say they want one thing, but then their behavior will say they want another, right? When we first introduced the Wandering Golem encounter, all the challenger players, or I should say even like low masters and grandmasters players, will complain on your Reddits, and then we'll go check the data, and it's their third most picked portal, right? And of course, their first most picked portal is Prismatic Party. Like, challenger players also want to have fun when they're playing the game. Just because they're challenger players doesn't mean they stopped having fun. They just get really try hard about it. And so what's really dangerous here is your instinct as a designer would be to flatten the game a bit and be like, okay, prismatic augments show up a lot less. Spatulas maybe get removed from the game because they're too spiky. Another example that's pretty obvious would be lower the power of vertical traits, so that you're more incentivized to fast 8 and fast 9 and things like that. Generally lower the power of like a 3-star 1 cost and 2 cost would be some of those things I think a lot of challenger players would say they want. But then they would play that game and they would find out that it's not very fun. It's like, well, every game I just opened fort, fast 9, fast 8, rolled down on 4-2, and I didn't hit, therefore it's not as fun. Or, I guess what I'm trying to say is I think we've actually done a good job of making the most fun game possible for competitive players. And anything that you think we would make more true is going to make the game less fun. Now, that's not to say we've done everything. I'm not trying to say everything's perfect, right? Like, dumb example is if 2 players are win streaking, they should probably fight each other. That's a slight improvement to matchmaking, no problem, right? There are small improvements left to make for the game, but I don't think there's any dramatic things left in TFT that are like truly ruining competitive integrity or anything like that. But again, when you're playing at that level, the smallest little blip on your radar, you will sound the bell on, 3-2 build around augments because challengers perceive one augment forward thinking to be too good. Get rid of it, right? Like the world that the challenger players describe when they're complaining is every augment is a stat stick. Every item drops exactly the way you want it. Every 4-cost doesn't need traits to play around. And then you make that game. It's a very boring game. So, but I think, again, if my boss came to me and said, competitive matters more, those would be the spaces I would start to explore. It would be, and I mean, sometimes we do this already, right? Like, for example, I think the prismatic traits changes that are coming in set 15 are an example of a change that, I'll be frank, is the initial target was competitive players, right? It's like we didn't want worlds to be decided by the Garen encounter or because 2 spatulas dropped or anything like that. And, you'll read the Reddit threads where they're like, just make the solution you have to be level 10, or just make the solution to get rid of the Garen encounter. And it's like, well, no, those move the needle a little. But at the end of the day, if the Lost Streak player drops 2 spats, you're still going to complain, right? Like, none of that changes. But when we did that, and again, you'll find out what the change is soon, but when we made that change, it was, okay, we need to find a more fair version of this, but we can't remove it because this is one of the highlights for a lot of our for fun players. So our solution had to be something that appeals to both, right? A lot of the solutions being presented here in the Reddit thread are challenger-only solutions that make the game less fun for everybody else. Because, man, when we first said we're making changes to Prismatic, trust me, everyone on the team that's like very for fun focused in a good way was like, what are you doing? Knock it off. You're going to make the game less fun for people. Please stop it. I was like, no, trust, we got this. It'll still be fun. And I'm pretty happy with the execution we ended up on. Still needs testing. Like, you guys let us know if it ends up being not very fun. And it does require some good tuning, but yeah, like I said, you'll find out in like 3 days. So I think that's an example of a change where the target was competitive players, but with for fun players in mind to improve the game. And I think that's the kind of stuff that leads us to the best solutions, is not one or the other, but thinking about ways you can make sure both get hit. And again, I know Leduc's asking this, and I like using Leduc because Leduc to me is the perfect example of a player archetype, right? It's like the fun for TFT for Leduc is not gaining LP. It's finding interesting combinatorics that essentially break the game. But why I think that's important is because fundamentally that's what TFT is. That's the fun of TFT, right? Is like when TFT fails, for both players really, it's when you execute on something that you think should be good, you feel like it's like, hey, I high rolled and I made this combination and I was clever about it, and then it just doesn't function. That is a disappointment to all player types and leads to a very bad experience, And it's an interesting thin line, right? Like, I think Long Croc is an example of this, right? Like, someone has the idea that like, oh man, a Renekton who can just sit in the back and go crazy, that sounds awesome. And you're like, that's cool. And if it's underpowered, you're like, again, that's that disappointment level. But if it's overpowered, what happens is it becomes this like augment gated win condition. And that's when the challenger players get mad. And it's like, well, this thing's OP, but I can't play it because I don't have an RFC or a rapid fire emblem or whatever. And so you end up in this really tough situation where it's like, things have to be exciting enough, but rare enough and interesting enough, but once discovered, not common enough that they become boring and repetitive, which is a tough thing to get right. So, yeah, I kind of wandered off topic a little bit and started talking about, the exploration player type. But again, that's the joy of TFT, is finding fun combinations, making them work, and making sure they work, right? Like Mundo was an example in set 14 where when we launched, we'd had a vision for like, hey, a 6 bruiser Mundo that you stack with a bunch of health should be big and scary and cool. But we launched weak and he wasn't. And so if you tried that, it was disappointing, right? We can't have a game where you try these things, again, for either player type. So, all right, I think that kind of covers the question. But again, it's such a fascinating question because there is a world where someday they're like, nope, competitive doesn't matter. Or on the opposite side, hey, we got to make sure competitive is tighter and buttoned up. Because, man, that world's being decided by some silly high roll was not very fun. Please change it. Actually, I think the best example from this set is the augment Think Fast, right? Like, when we brought back Think Fast, I think every high-level player was going, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? We already know the problems with this. We already know the extreme power. I think even just in this set, there are clips of people getting Think Fast and pulling off extreme feats. The one I remember is Goobums getting it on 4-2 and then using it to find an MF3 on 4-2. And it's like, do we want worlds decided like that? No, which is why when it came time for worlds, we disabled it. And we went, okay, it's off. We have to make decisions like that. So there you go. All right. All right, that means I have time for one more question. I brought 2 just in case. Okay, let's do this one. Hero Augment design. How do we pick which champions get them? How do we feel about them? What are we doing with them? So, what we've learned with Hero Augments, or at least my read on Hero Augments, at least at current understanding, and the reason I say at current understanding is that we haven't really innovated in this space much. Hero Augments have basically been the same since set 10, and they followed the same pattern. We haven't had time to really try to innovate in the space. I think the only innovation has been the exploration of 3 costs. But Hero Augments follow a very simple pattern, okay? So first off, how do you decide what champions get them? Well, basically in TFT right now, there are 2 types of champions. Tanks and non-tanks. The problem with non-tanks is most non-tanks, we make sure that when they have 3 items, they can carry and do a lot of work. And if a Hero Augment says, hey, carry even harder, that's not really great. That's just do more damage, or it's a augment that's just stats essentially boiled down into a different output, right? Telling a carry to carry differently is not very powerful or exciting. So carry Hero Augments are, for the most part, off the table. Now, there is an exception, which was the team-up augments in set 13, which I think were great, but that's a different conversation and much healthier because you're distributing the power among multiple champions. And one of the best things we learned all the way from Dragonmancer is that if you can distribute power amongst multiple champions, you can give out more of it and it doesn't seem as unhealthy versus concentrating it all into one unit. So that leaves tanks. And so initially, when you're starting to make the hero augments for a new set, the first thing you do is you grab every 1 cost and 2 cost tank and you look at them and you go, all right, which ones should be hero augments? Now, the thing we've learned from hero augments is that you can really boil them down into 2 types from here. There are the types that radically transform the champion. The most common version of this is plus range, right? This is Shen with Time Knife. There's a couple others. Galio turning him into a ranged champion in set 11 or 12, one of the sets. But basically, the ones that really, really radically transform them. And then there's the ones that have been, I would call them just like, well, now they melee more. And it's like, okay, instead of tank items, now they have Titans and BT, and it's fine. And one of our biggest failings of Hero Augments is for a while there, I want to say in set 12 and maybe a little in 13, is so many of the Hero Augments were like, now the tank wants Titans and BT. Woo. And they're still really tanky, but now they do damage. Yay. Those Hero Augments, I don't think we consider a success. If it's just all of a sudden you're tanky in a different way and you do more damage, who cares? That's not very interesting. So we try to find more that we can make into the do something very, very different, right? And I think set 14 has started to push some of that a little bit more. Not all of them were a success, mind you, but it's like, we want you to radically change what items you put on these characters and essentially make more different types of behavioral outputs, so that essentially what we've done is, instead of the 36 carries that are normally in a set, now you have 46 carries possibly. It's just 10 of them are gated behind a hero augment, which is good. More variety for a set is good. And so that's generally been the principle. And so if the augment team or the design team is looking at their set, they take all the 1 cost or 2 cost hero augments, or 1 cost or 2 cost tanks, and look at the 3 cost tanks as well now, or because we're at least starting to explore that with Chug Jug, and then go, okay, which ones do I have a really fun idea, right? Like, I'll tell you next set, and I talk about it in the rundown, but there's at least 2 tanks that, like, one Giovanni had some pretty fun with. I think they might both be Giovanni ones. I don't remember who did the other one. But there's definitely 2 where it's like, oh, you radically changed this tank's behavior and made them do something cooler. That's great, And so the ones we have ideas for that, we try to do. And if we run out of time or don't have a great idea, well, then that tank might not get a hero augment. And sometimes those ideas pan out really well. Other times you get Chug Bug, where I think I've buffed that augment like 6 times and it's still not very good. So, which there's a lesson, and that's the thing with these hero augments, we can take some risks. But we also learned that if a hero augment is too strong, it gets really, really dangerous, right? Because having a 1 cost tank dominate carry into the end game isn't particularly healthy either. So, the example being, I think it was set 11 Garen, that hero augment got pretty out of control. So finding that right line is pretty tough. But generally we found that they're pretty popular and pretty exciting. And that's actually the biggest thing we have to get right. Because if they ship weak, again, it goes back to what I was saying about the Leduc player, right? Where it's like, I trusted that Riot would make this thing that was fun. I took it. It wasn't very fun. Even though I feel like I played it perfectly. That feels bad. But if it's too strong, then it's like, oh, look, you just pressed the hero augment button and you won the game. That's not very fair either, right? So definitely have to get that right. And I think set 14 was a version where most of the hero augments ended up they ended up weak at launch. And then over time we would get there. And I think the one exception to this, hilariously enough, was the Kane hero augment, where players actually thought it launched too strong. And then it became like unplayable. So, but there's also some shape challenges there where it's like, oh yeah, it turns out when you make a champion who's based on resets, and then you hit the late game and things have 4,000 health and 200 armor and MR, and you can't get any resets, well, you can't succeed anymore. And so if anything, that's a design challenge of the Kane augment, of like, when you make a champion based on resets, you have to have a fundamental understanding of combat pacing to know that that's how that's going to play out, So, yeah, TLDR here is take all the 1 and 2 cost tanks, maybe the 3 cost tanks, look at them, go, which ones do we have exciting ideas for unique outputs, and do we have time to make a new spell for? Make those, have fun with them. There's your hero augments. So if anything, I would say we've gotten a little predictable in that pattern. It's like, who's going to be the this type one? Because we only have so many items also, right? So it's like, okay, we pick our first hero augment, and this one's going to be the one that's the Titans BT user. We make a second hero augment. This is the one that's going to be the Ginsu's user. We make our third hero augment. This is the one that's going to be the AP user, right? Your Silas, right? And then eventually you're like, well, we kind of have all the shapes covered for melee champions, so what do? You know, and again, how many hero augments are BT still? Well, a lot of them, right? So, but then again, maybe we've made some changes that fix that problem too. You'll find out in 3 days. Ha! So, there you go. All right, I only got through 2 questions, but hopefully they were big, meaty answers. So, there you go. Reminder, no episode tomorrow, because tomorrow at this time we'll probably be on like game 3 or 4 of the championship, because at 4 a.m. I got to get up at like 3 a.m. I have to be already set up, turn on stream at like 3:15. But like 3 a.m. we'll be streaming Worlds, and we'll be watching day 1 where 40 players get knocked down to 32 players. It'll be fun. Yeah. So, and like I said, you should probably watch Froden's co-stream or the main broadcast or someone else. But if you're super nerdy and want to watch an old guy nerd out about the game, I'll be there. So, all right, that's going to do it for me. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Hopefully you have a great end of your week. That's going to do it for me. Until next time, take it easy.